Welcome, Yamhill County, to Speaking Frankly. I'm your host, Howie Harkema, and our tagline is, "And how we doing?" Today, I have Casey Kulla, who is running for Oregon Commissioner of Labor and Industries. He's on the ballot for the primary on May 17th, 2022. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you, Howie, even if we're at a distance.
Yes, even from the distance. So the Oregon legislature founded the Bureau of Labor and Industries, BOLI, in 1903 with the mission to protect employment rights, advanced employment opportunities, and protect access to housing and public accommodations that are free from unlawful discrimination. Would you like to speak to that, please?
Oh my gosh, yes. So in the short version is that the Bureau of Labor and Industries, their job is to educate and enforce Oregon's civil rights laws. And that at the most basic level, so that everyone in the state of Oregon is free to go into a public space, is free to be housed, to rent an apartment, to go and buy a house without being harassed for their appearance, for anything in particular about them, and that they have somewhere to go at the state to get help if something like that has happened, if they've had an injustice, if they haven't been treated fairly. The flip side, which you spoke about, is that the Bureau of Labor and Industries is also responsible for making sure that apprenticeships do what they say they're going to do, that they give people hours and that people in those apprenticeships actually graduate to be journey level professionals in their trades. Yeah, it's a heavy responsibility, and it's really an imbalance. It's the state's attempt to balance power differentials between businesses, employers, and workers, or the general public. Wow. And one of the most powerful things about that is that you don't need an attorney when you go to the Bureau of Labor and Industries. If you feel you've been wronged in some way by somebody in the community, and you're just not sure what went wrong, but you know it's not right, you can go to the Bureau of Labor and Industries and you can fill out a questionnaire, and they'll take it from there of doing the steps to find out if something really happened. It's really the front end of civil rights resolution in the state.
Do you work with the Fair Housing Council of Oregon with this?
Yeah, so the Fair Housing Council of Oregon works with the Bureau of Labor and Industries, and the Bureau of Labor and Industries, or BOLI for short, right, enforces the Fair Housing Act, both federal law and state law.
So it says the commissioner enforces state laws prohibiting discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodation, and vocational, professional, and trade schools. The commissioner has the authority to initiate a commissioner's complaint on behalf of the victims of discrimination. Would you like to speak to that, Casey?
Yeah, Howie, I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but a very prime example of the commissioner initiating a commissioner complaint is when a couple of years ago, so starting in 2014, complaints started coming out of the Oregon legislature of harassment, specifically sexual harassment, by lawmakers towards interns, staff, and lobbyists. And there didn't seem to be anything that they could do about it. And people who were being harassed, who were being assaulted, really had very little power, and they were very scared of coming forward. And so the commissioner actually initiated a complaint on behalf of two anonymous people who'd worked in the legislature. And basically they did a broad investigation to find out the level of sexual harassment, and then also what to do about it, because there's a lot of elected officials. There's no formal process for censuring or saying, you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this. So in the end, working with the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader and Legislative Council, the commissioner, who then ended up being Val Hoyle, the current commissioner, agreed to a settlement that set up an office called the Legislative Equity Office with, in theory, an independent investigator to do these complaints and investigations. situations of sexual harassment. So it's a really specific example of the commissioner taking it upon themselves to do what maybe other people on their own can't do.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
So through the wage and hour division, the commissioner administers state laws relating to wages, hours, and employment, basic working conditions, child labor, and prevailing wage rates. The licenses certain labor contractors to protect the workers they employ. The division oversees the wage security fund that covers workers for unpaid wages in certain business closures and enforces group health insurance termination notification provisions. Would you like to speak to that, Commissioner?
Absolutely. And it's so funny. I'm a county commissioner. I'm running for labor commissioner. The title will just go with me, as it were.
Yeah.
I'm actually looking forward to coming to the Board of Commissioners and providing testimony, and they're going to have to call me commissioner, right? So this is a big area of law, and it's an area where there's a lot of risk to workers and a lot of people who really are vulnerable. One of the most common forms of theft in Oregon is wage theft, just on the sheer scale of the value of the money that's being stolen. The Bureau of Labor and Industries has over time not kept up the number of staff as the population in the state of Oregon and of the economic activity. And what that's resulted in is enforcement is lacking. And when you come to Bureau of Labor and Industries with a wage theft complaint, for example, your employer, when you were laid off, never sent you your last paycheck, for example, or didn't pay you properly for overtime. Those cases can take a very, very long time. You might not even hear anything from them, even though you have all of the data proving that you've had your wages withheld. On the flip side of it, there's only about 1% of valid wage claims that had a penalty assessed that actually got paid. So there's many employers who are basically skating along on the backs of regular withholding wages and not paying them, which is a travesty, I will say. And one of the things that there's a theory out there that deterrence works, right? That deterrence prevents, and that levying heavy penalties in the cases of employers who have egregiously and intentionally and repeatedly stolen wages, levying a heavy penalty against them that goes to their workers in addition to their back wages is one of the best ways to hold employers accountable and also to prevent others from doing it in the future.
Does that occur a lot?
It does. Yeah. And one of the things I will say, Howie, is that I mentioned at the beginning that it's both about worker rights and also about responsibilities. And the responsibilities are really at the employer level. They are responsible for knowing the laws and knowing how to follow them and actually get for example, wages to their employees properly, or requiring breaks at the proper times. And Bureau of Labor and Industries has a role in making sure that employers know what to do, right? Because if an employer is like, I need this employee to do this work, that's really what they're focused on. And because we've implemented these laws, we've passed a law and now we have to enforce it. The Bureau's responsibility includes making sure that they know about it and making sure, just like workers need to know their rights and they need to know where to go for help. But employers really need to know their responsibilities in words they can understand. And I will say there's a culture clash that's very evident between businesses and the state of Oregon, but there's also a communication gap between workers in the state of Oregon as well. And so my job really as labor commissioner, besides running a top-notch agency that really builds trust in the community, is to make sure that workers know their rights and that employers know their responsibilities on an ongoing basis.
So last summer, we had a gentleman who was a farm worker in St. Paul that passed away. Is that the type of thing that you're speaking about, where they have rights to water, where they have rights to breaks, to get out of the heat, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, there are wage and hour rights that they have, and then there's also civil rights that they have. If they're an older worker, they can't be fired because they're older. If they have disabilities, they can't be fired instead of accommodating those disabilities. The Sebastian Francisco Perez, I think was his name at Ernst
Right.
Nursery, who died during the heat wave. His case, or the case against his employer, the labor contractor and the farm employer, or the farm. I don't want to say farmer because it's a big organization, right? It's farm business. So the farm business and the labor contractor both have fines against them right now by the Oregon Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
OSHA, right.
So OSHA does that, but OSHA actually works together with BOLI, because BOLI's responsibility is to investigate retaliation complaints at all of these agencies, such as OSHA. So retaliation is a big deal, Howie. If somebody feels like they can't say anything because they're going to get retaliated against, they won't say anything.
Right.
And the more vulnerable you are, the less likely you are to say something. If there's something dangerous happening, or if somebody's stealing wages, or if somebody's not being accommodated. And so that's where there is a connection, right, of the Bureau of Labor and Industries, because if folks who are on a work crew, a labor contractor crew with Sebastian, if they are scared to say anything because they know they're going to get fired and they're not going to have somebody who has their back, they're never going to say anything.
Very good. So the agency works to support and train employers so that they can more easily comply with frequently complex state and federal employment law. Would you like to speak about that, Casey?
Yeah, and I've talked about that a little bit, but but I will add to that BOLI has this responsibility to let businesses know their responsibilities. And when I talk with business owners and I talk to business trade associations, they say that businesses are worried that if they come forward and ask, am I doing this right? That they're going to get hammered for that thing that they've asked about if they're not doing it right. And so that leads to how important it is to have a working and trusting relationship with businesses, so that business owners know, or their managers know, that they can go to BOLI and ask a question without risking fines, penalties, shaming, right? Because part of the public disclosure of violations is a public shaming of a sort, and that's really valuable. But if a business is just trying to figure out, am I doing this right, the Bureau really needs to be the place that they go when they know that they can get an answer, rather than like an enforcement or an infraction.
So is there a lot of fear factor involved here as far as the employer?
Yes, there is. There's a lot of wariness, I think, is a way to think about it.
Sure.
One of the, so I was, as you know, I was a cannabis grower, a pot grower, a pot farmer from 2016 to 2021 in the license system. And in that, the OLCC started out in a very, like, as I felt it, an adversarial relationship with regulated entities, so the licensees. And then over time, because they were like, we have this thing to enforce and that's what we're going to do, and everything was a big deal. And over time, they began to realize that having what they call a safe harbor was the way to go, because a safe harbor was, with this sphere, this universe of infractions, mistakes, violations, that the first thing that they would do is education, and then mediation or remediation, right? So they would say, hey, you're not doing this right, and here's how to fix it, and here's your timeline for fixing it. And that's, I will say, a tremendous way to go, but because it keeps lawyers out of it, which is costly. It reduces the amount of time it takes, and it reduces that adversarial relationship, because once that trust is broken, it's really hard to get back.
Yeah, I would think that giving the advice of how to comply with the law and how to go about it would really help.
For sure. And I think it's, one of the I think one of the inherent challenges is that the way that BOLI's process is structured, it's like goes from informal to formal really quickly, and then it's an adversarial relationship where there's investigation and there's formal complaints that everybody is signing, and they're providing documentation, and you don't know when the documentation is going to become public. And so having businesses and employers understand the process and understand where in there they have the ability to just fix it is really important.
So the next thing is, and you've talked a little bit about this, but I'd like you to speak at length on it. The commissioner also directs the state's registered apprenticeship training system that gives workers the opportunity to learn a job skill while earning a living. The program benefits employers by providing a pool of skilled workers to meet business and industry demands. With everything that's occurred with the layoffs and COVID, I would think that this is super important at this point.
Oh my gosh, yes, it is. I mean, there are industries that are screaming for workers, right?
Exactly.
And we're also seeing a demographic cliff, as it were, where workers are getting older and older, and the average age of a worker in skilled industries is getting
graying out. We're graying out.
It was bound to happen. I was going to school at a university and studying biochemistry as this group of professors were finally retiring, who'd been hired on in the 50s and 60s when the regional public school system was dramatically upscaled, right? We got a lot bigger. And so I've seen, the challenges when you are expected to keep the same services going, but you're having these older folks leaving with all of their knowledge with them, right? And so one of the values, it's an interesting combination because it doesn't seem to fit with civil rights in housing and public accommodations and workers' rights. But it's really about making sure that we always have high skilled workers for our skilled industries, and that people have the opportunity to have a high wage job, right? I mean, as you know, prices keep going up, whether it be housing or gas or food. And at least one of the things that I hear is like a core value in Oregon is that people want their kids to be able to live where they grew up if they want to. And older people want to be able to stay with family if they want to. It's like a kind of this multi-generational rootedness that seems to be lacking as a cultural thing elsewhere, but I hear a lot in Oregon, right? Even in particular neighborhoods in Portland where people are like, I want my kids to be able to live here when they grow up. And the only way to be able to do that, because it will be very challenging to slow or to reduce the cost of housing overall, the market forces, but we can build good jobs here where people have a mission and a focus. And one thing I hear from young people is that they're like, I just don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. The world is both uncertain and wide open at the same time. And having these pre-apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship programs that are funded by the state or supported, childcare is now something that an apprentice can get help with. They can get help with transportation so that they can learn and so that they can make a living along the way. But one of the things that's really important for the labor commissioner to be doing is to make sure that apprenticeships are actually graduating workers, sure. Right? Because if you've gone through 6 years in an apprenticeship and you're entering your 7th and you realize that you're never going to pass the electrician's test, the low voltage test or the high voltage test, or that you're never actually going to be a journey plumber because you haven't gotten the skills necessary because your apprenticeship is crappy, then you've wasted 6 years, right? You've been misled. And the job of the labor commissioner is to make sure that all those apprenticeships are actually graduating people. Yeah. And I will say one more thing along those lines is that,
I got another thing to speak about too.
Perfect. So the legislature and the governor and the Racial Justice Council, and a bunch of workforce boards who take federal dollars to do training of the workforce, invested $200 million of taxpayer money into a big workforce training and education program called Future Ready Oregon. So that money is getting rolled out even as we speak to really dramatically expand the realm of who has access to training and the types of training that are available. And this means that people are going to get paid to work, and they're going to get paid to train to work, right? For the future. It's really like an investment. And the thing I want to make sure, because there's lots of different ways to measure success when you're pouring this much money into something all at once, there's a list of ways to measure success that's in the bill. And they're very specific, like bureaucratic ways to measure success. But what I've realized is that we will only be able to measure success by having somebody who said, I want to get a job in my own community, or I want to get a job that that pays me well, or I want to get a job that has a future to it, that each trainee actually measures the success on their own. So it's like really human centered as opposed to like dollars and cents centered.
So with the outsourcing of most of our manufacturing across America back in the 80s, a lot of stuff such as welding, machining, you spoke about electrical, you spoke about plumbing, all of those apprenticeship programs kind of went away when the outsourcing began. Do you see trade schools or Portland Community College or Chemeketa or taking up some of the slack in getting these apprenticeships going as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Howie. And there are business-driven apprenticeship pathways, and there are community college-driven apprenticeship pathways. There's still trade apprenticeship pathways that exist out there, and the people who run them are very proud of them. But what I hear when I talk to folks who are in charge of these, about charge of training apprentices to be the future journey level electricians or the journey level truck drivers, is that they're very proud of the fact that it's driven by their own industry and not subsidized in any way, that they're teaching their own. But what I hear is that there needs to be a stronger demand on the upstream side of projects, right? That projects need apprentices so that pathways can drive more apprentices into those projects, right? That we can continue to train people. And so, for example, the electricians union has an amazing apprenticeship program, but there's a huge waiting list for it. You could go there right now and you could fill out the forms and take the test, and you'd be placed on a waiting list. And it would depend upon how good you are in their eyes, how soon you got an apprenticeship starting. And you might wait years to do that.
Right.
And it's because they just don't have enough demand on the upstream side of it. And so there's a couple of projects that are happening and are in process that hope to drive a lot of that. There's Intel is doing a big expansion. So they're a big source of that kind of manufacturing trade related work. But there's also manufacturing apprenticeships that are happening right now so that the people who need to be trained to be in those chip fabricators, for example, can be there. There's another one that's a big renewable diesel project out in Columbia County, and they're hoping to have, I think, 3,000 people working on site during construction. So there's projects that are going to drive some of this work too. But I will say in Yamhill County, we are actually have some of the highest per capita manufacturing jobs in Oregon. And it's driven by a couple of different things. It's driven by wine, because wine is manufacturing. So food manufacturers in general, but we also have a lot of high skill, kind of like high tech industries, small manufacturers that feed into the dental equipment manufacturing supply, right? Because we have number one and number two dental equipment manufacturers.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Oregon Commissioner of Labor and Industries is a nonpartisan elected state executive position in the Oregon state government. Commissioners serve a term of 4 years. Are you ready to serve another term of 4 years, Casey?
Well, I'm ready to serve one term, that's for sure. I've committed Howie to 2 terms. As you know, one of our kids is 9 right now,
Right.
and I want to make sure that they've got stability in their life, because it's, we kids only get one shot at their childhood, right? So my plan is to focus on that. And I will say, my experience in this nonpartisan role of county commissioner has trained me well. I am ready to figure out how to do the stuff with everybody. As you know, like I can work with elected officials or community members or advocates or opponents, right? To just get the work done that needs to be done and to talk about the things that people don't want to talk about.
So we're in our last few minutes here, Casey. It goes by fast. So I'm going to bring up some information on your run as far as websites and such like that. Would you
Sounds
like
great.
to speak about what the community can do to assist you in your run for labor commissioner, please?
Yes. Well, Howie, as you know, and as you've said, so this is a statewide nonpartisan race. There's actually only 2 statewide elections that are contested that are on the ballot right now, which is statewide, right? So there's 2 things that everybody's going to vote on where they actually have a choice. And as you know, because we have a closed primary system, the 40% of Oregon's voters who aren't affiliated with a party only have those 2 really to make a choice on, besides a couple, there'll be county commissioner races in many counties. And so this is a prime opportunity to encourage people to engage in a process. They have a choice that they get to make by May 17th. And I will say, encourage your friends and neighbors across the state to really look at the race, consider the people in the race, and consider the experiences and the perspective of those people who are running.
And who is running besides you? How many?
Yeah, there's actually 7 people on the ballot, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Some folks who are really not campaigning actively, and then some folks who have a depth of experience in particular areas.
So talk about your travel here lately to entice people to vote for you, Casey. I think you've been all over Oregon.
I truly have. And, as county commissioner, I know a lot of people around the state, but also in my work as a farmer and opposing a gravel quarry, I know a lot of folks in the conservation community too. So it's been great to have starting points of conversations about river health, and then start talking about worker rights and the Civil Rights Agency. It's been an amazing experience to go into inner Southwest Portland or Southeast Portland and North Portland and listen to people talking about racial justice and policing specifically, and how the Bureau of Labor and Industries might be able to take on police oversight investigations. So it's been amazing to meet people in Oregon. And I will say it gives me a lot of hope and a lot of trust in our state.
Well, I have my little pin here. So if people want to help you, is there anything that they can do besides fill out their ballot with Casey Kulla on it?
Yeah, in these last few days before next Tuesday is when ballots are due. Just remember to talk to friends and families. A lot of people just don't know who to vote for, and they're craving somebody's vote and somebody's recommendation that they trust, right? It's all about the people that we trust as we talk about this and learn more. So remember to vote. This will likely go to the general election, and then we'll talk a lot more about how people can help across the state.
It's all about relationships.
It's all about relationships,
Yeah.
Howie.
Thank you so much,
Right.
Casey Kulla.
Thank
for being
you.
on today. Can't wait to see how it turns out for you. And yes, it probably will go to November before we know what's really going on. Thank
Truly,
you for
with so
running.
much.
Thank you for doing such a great job on the Board of Commissioners in Yamhill County and fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much, Howie.
I'm going to thank you.